Welcome to The Explainer. So, it's been 1 month. 1 month since the world just held its breath as the US and Israel attacked Iran. Today, we're going to break down what has spiraled into a massive global conflict and, what it really means for all of us. Let's dive in.
And we're going to start maybe not where you'd expect, not on the battlefield, but right here at a gas pump. $5.09 for unleaded gas in Las Vegas. This right here is a really stark reminder that this isn't some distant war. Oh no, this is a conflict that's already hitting us right where it hurts, in our wallets.
And that really brings us to the first major takeaway from the last 30 days. There is simply no victory in sight. What was sold to the public as this quick, decisive action is now a total quagmire, a grinding war of attrition with absolutely no clear end. This timeline? Well, it tells a story of a massive miscalculation. It all kicked off with that big strike on February 28th that killed Iran's supreme leader. But Iran's response was just as fast. They shut down the Strait of Hormuz, a critical artery for the world. And since then, the US and Israel have hit thousands of targets, but here we are, a month later, stuck in a strategic stalemate. The quick war is over. The long war, well, it's just begun.
So that brings us to the military reality on the ground. You see, despite all this immense firepower, both the US and Israel have found themselves, strategically stuck. They're up against an incredibly resilient adversary, and the whole conflict has just morphed into this brutal, grinding war of attrition.
The gap between what they said they were going to do and what's actually happening, it's just staggering. The goals were clear, right? Regime change, dismantle the nuclear program, and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But a month later, as you can see, not a single one of those objectives has been met.
Iran's mosaic defense is proving to be a really formidable strategy. It's a decentralized, multi-layered approach. They're using these hardened, hidden sites that are just incredibly difficult to find, let alone break. And get this, sources estimate they are churning out 100 ballistic missiles per month from these secret facilities. Meanwhile, the US and its allies are reportedly facing shortages of their own defensive missiles to intercept them. So, a ground invasion? That's starting to look less like a real option and more like a catastrophic trap.
And this stalemate on the battlefield, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's now kicked off a completely different kind of war, a global one. This one isn't fought with missiles, but with supply chains and energy prices. A massive shockwave is just radiating across the entire global economy.
One analyst put it pretty bluntly, this isn't just a war in the Middle East anymore, it's an economic war on the entire world. See, when energy prices spike like this, it's not just about what you pay for gas. It's about the cost of, everything. Factories start to shut down, supply chains break, and whole economies can start to crumble.
This is the choke point. 3,500. That's how many ships are currently stranded outside the Strait of Hormuz. And that's not just a number. It's a terrifying symbol of a global economy that's right on the brink of paralysis.
The domino effect is just cascading. You have spiking energy prices, which are crippling the production of fertilizer. That's a process that needs a ton of energy. That disruption then drives up food prices all over the world. The UN is now actually warning of a major humanitarian crisis, saying tens of millions are at risk of starvation if this keeps up.
And the long-term outlook? It's looking pretty grim. A lot of experts are now drawing these direct parallels to the 1973 oil crisis. They're warning that this conflict could easily trigger a full decade of what's called stagflation. And that's that toxic mix of high inflation and zero economic growth.
But the damage isn't just economic. There's something much, much bigger shifting right under the surface. Beyond all the chaos in the markets, this war is acting like a powerful accelerator, and it's pushing us really fast toward a completely new world order.
For years, all you heard in Western capitals was de-risking from China, reducing economic dependence. Well, now, that entire conversation has completely flipped on its head. This quote, it just captures this new, almost unbelievable reality. Countries are now trying to de-risk from the United States. They're seeing the US as a source of global instability, so they're hedging their bets, looking for new partners, and quietly trying to build a world that's a whole lot less dependent on American power.
And you can see this shift happening in real time. In just the last 2 months, we've seen what people are calling a pilgrimage to Beijing. We're talking about the leaders of America's closest allies, Starmer from the UK, Carney from Canada, Merz from Germany, Macron from France. They're all looking for closer ties with China. Let's be really clear, this is not just a series of diplomatic visits. This is a tectonic shift.
It is a huge sign that the old post-war alliances are seriously fraying at the edges.
And all of this, it brings us to what might be the most profound, the most lasting consequence of this war, the potential collapse of the entire global order, the one that was so carefully built after World War II.
By acting on their own, the US and Israel have basically shown the world that the UN is powerless. It's become a modern-day League of Nations, an institution that's totally unable to prevent major wars. It's becoming a relic of a bygone era.
So what replaces international law? Well, the law of the jungle, a world where might makes right, and the only rule is that there are no rules. This is the new, frankly, scary reality we are all facing.
And this leads us to one final, absolutely terrifying question. In a world where international law is basically dead, is getting a nuclear weapon the only real path to survival? This conflict may have just kicked off a brand new and far more dangerous arms race. The question isn't if more countries will try to get the bomb anymore, it's when.
If you had told a Pentagon logistics general 30 days ago that the United States military would blow through an entire year's worth of multi-million-dollar Patriot interceptor missiles just to shoot down swarms of drones powered by $20 lawnmower engines.
Oh, they would have laughed you right out of the room.
Right, they would have laughed because it was supposed to be a surgical operation. You know, that was the exact phrase broadcast across every major network.
Quick, clinical, in and out.
Exactly. Quick and clinical. The narrative was basically that you eliminate the command structure, you degrade the critical military infrastructure, and you have the troops home before the global markets even have time to register a panic.
Right. It was pitched as this necessary recalibration of regional power.
But let's look at the calendar today. Today is Sunday, March 29th, 2026. We are exactly 30 days into the United States and Israeli war on Iran.
30 days.
And the global order isn't just shaking, it is officially fracturing under the weight of an escalating catastrophe.
Because the clinical precision of a PowerPoint presentation in a war room, it just vanishes the absolute second the first ballistic missile leaves its silo.
Right.
What we are witnessing right now on the ground is the textbook definition of a strategic quagmire. I mean, the foundational assumptions that launched this campaign have completely dissolved.
They really have.
And we are rapidly transitioning into an environment defined by the collapse of conventional rules of engagement.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We have been sifting through an absolute mountain of fresh sources over the past 48 hours.
A massive stack of data.
Yeah, we are talking about raw journalist dispatches from the front lines, independent YouTube reports, rigorous military logistics assessments, and, emergency economic forecasts from global analysts.
But you're pretty grim right now.
Extremely grim. Our mission today is to cut through the immense fog of war, unpack the most likely scenarios for the weeks ahead, and explain exactly why geopolitical analysts are suddenly, and very seriously, using phrases like the end of international law.
It's a heavy title.
It is. We are titling today's discussion, Navigating a Lawless War in the Post-UN Era.
And the goal here is to really look at the underlying mechanics of this conflict.
Right.
Because the reality of what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz or the airspace over Tehran right now, well, it is directly dictating the reality of your daily life.
Yeah, I'm talking directly to you listening right now.
From the supply chains you rely on to the stability of the currency in your bank account.
Exactly. Whether you are staring at your local gas pump and feeling a cold sweat over the sudden violent spike in prices, or whether you're trying to comprehend the sheer terrifying scale of a multi-front regional war.
Or if you're just trying to understand how the world fundamentally changed its shape in just 30 days.
Right, this deep dive is designed to give you clarity. Now, we are looking at raw, incredibly intense reports today.
Very intense.
These sources contain highly charged political and military claims, including devastating reports of civilian casualties and extreme rhetoric from the leadership of every nation involved.
And we need to be clear about our role here.
Yeah, our job isn't to take a side, endorse a specific political narrative, or justify any military action.
No, not at all.
We are here strictly to analyze the undeniable math of what is happening on the battlefield and the economic shockwaves rippling out from it.
That objective framework is crucial because in a conflict of this magnitude, the information war, the propaganda, the projected confidence is often deployed to mask severe tactical vulnerabilities.
We have to separate what political leaders are claiming from what the supply chain and munitions data actually prove.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start on the ground and look at the glaring disparity between the political narrative we were sold and the reality of the battlefield.
The gap between those two is staggering.
It really is. We need to figure out why a war that Western intelligence predicted would be over in a matter of days has now dragged on to the 1-month mark with no end in sight.
Well, we have to look at the genesis of the operation, which frankly represents a colossal failure of initial intelligence.
Right.
The reports indicate this intelligence was driven heavily by assessments from the Mossad, which subsequently fed into the strategic decision-making of the Trump administration in the United States and the Netanyahu government in Israel.
And the foundational premise, the linchpin of this entire operation, was the belief that the Iranian government was incredibly fragile.
Yes, fragile and ready to fall.
I was reading through those initial intelligence summaries, and they leaned heavily on the domestic unrest in Iran. They pointed to the massive protests over the last few years.
Where sources claim thousands of Iranian citizens died in clashes with the state.
Yeah. They combined that social unrest with the crushing, compounding weight of years of global economic sanctions.
Which have been brutal.
So the operating theory seemed to be that the Iranian state was essentially a hollowed-out structure, just waiting for a push.
The terminology military analysts in our sources are using to describe the operating theory is magical thinking.
Magical thinking. Wow.
Yeah, the intelligence apparatus basically convinced the political leadership that a massive, overwhelming initial strike, specifically targeting the supreme leader for assassination and heavily degrading critical infrastructure, would act as a massive kinetic shock.
Like a lightning bolt.
Right. The assumption was that this shock would instantly trigger organic regime change from within. They actually believed the population would rise up and finish the job the bombs started.
I have to pause on that logic, though. I was looking at the logistics report released by CENTCOM covering the air campaign.
The bombing numbers.
Yeah. In the last 30 days, the United States and Israel have dropped roughly 10,000 targeted munitions. 10,000 bunker busters, cruise missiles, and precision-guided bombs. I mean, if you drop 10,000 pieces of high explosives on a nation's military infrastructure, logically, you expect that infrastructure to be dusted.
You'd think there'd be nothing left.
Yet the Iranian state hasn't collapsed. Their military is still actively launching coordinated counterattacks. How is it physically possible that they are absorbing that level of kinetic punishment and still functioning?
To understand that, we have to look at the specific geography of Iran and the resulting military doctrine they've developed over the last 40 years.
The Zagros Mountains, right?
Yes. Iran is largely defined by the Zagros Mountains, which are this incredibly rugged, formidable natural fortress.
Yeah.
They learned during the devastating Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s that they could not leave their critical military assets exposed in traditional above-ground bases.
Because they'd just be sitting ducks.
Exactly. So they spent decades digging. They utilize what military strategists call a mosaic defense.
Wait, what does a mosaic defense actually look like in practice?
Well,
are we talking about isolated bunkers that don't talk to each other? Because the phrase makes it sound like, I don't know, a scattered art project.
Imagine taking a massive mirror representing a traditional, highly centralized military command structure and shattering it into 1,000 pieces.
Okay.
If an enemy drops a bomb on the central headquarters of a traditional military, the whole system goes blind. It's decapitated.
Right. Cut off the head of the snake.
But Iran's mosaic defense is decentralized and compartmentalized by design. They have hundreds of autonomous, deeply buried underground missile factories, storage bunkers, and launch silos.
All scattered across those mountain ranges.
Exactly. So if a 2,000-pound bunker buster bomb manages to cave in one regional command node, it doesn't really matter to the rest of the network.
It's exactly the opposite of a decapitation strike.
Yeah, if the communications core to Tehran is cut, the local base commander, in a subterranean bunker, already possesses the pre-approved operational authority.
They already have their orders.
Right. They have the targeting coordinates and the physical missiles to continue prosecuting the war. You can't cut off the head of the snake because there are 1,000 independent heads, all buried under hundreds of feet of solid rock and reinforced concrete.
So the 10,000 bombs dropped by the U.S. and Israel have certainly caused damage.
Oh, massive damage to the surface.
But they have failed to neutralize the core capabilities of that mosaic defense. It's like showing up for a marathon thinking it's a 100-meter dash.
That is a perfect analogy.
You know, you sprinted the first block and now you're completely out of breath, but the race has barely started.
And the cost of this initial sprint has been staggering.
Yeah, when I read the reports on the munitions deficit the U.S. is facing, I honestly thought it was a typo.
The brutal economics of asymmetric warfare are really catching up to the Pentagon right now. The United States and Israel are currently facing a critical, potentially fatal deficit of interceptor missiles.
Which are the Patriots.
Right. To defend their regional bases in Israeli airspace against the continuous waves of Iranian ballistic missiles and suicide drones, the U.S. expended an entire year's worth of Patriot missile production in just the first 5 days of this war.
An entire year's worth in 5 days.
That is roughly 800 interceptors gone before the first week was even over.
Let's break down the mechanics of why that is such a catastrophic bottleneck. I mean, why can't the defense contractors just spin up the assembly lines and churn out more Patriots?
It doesn't work like that anymore.
We are the United States, you know? We built a bomber an hour during World War II.
What's fascinating here is the sheer complexity of modern weaponry. A modern Patriot CAS-3 MSE missile is an incredibly complex, multi-million-dollar piece of aerospace engineering.
It's not just a tube full of gunpowder.
Far from it. It utilizes highly classified active radar seeker heads that require exotic materials and incredibly precise manufacturing tolerances.
Right.
It relies on advanced solid propellant rocket motors that literally take months just to cast and cure properly.
Months just to cure the fuel.
Yes, you have a massive, intricate supply chain involving specialized microchips, thermal batteries, titanium components. You simply cannot mass produce them overnight. They take roughly a year to assemble.
Okay, so that's the defense. Conversely, consider what they are shooting down.
Right. The drones.
An Iranian Shahed 136 drone is built using a commercial off-the-shelf engine you could find in a moped.
Literally a lawnmower engine.
Yeah, it uses civilian-grade GPS and a simple fiberglass delta wing body. It costs maybe $20,000 to construct.
So the U.S. is firing a $4 million, impossible-to-replace hyper-advanced missile to destroy a $20,000 flying lawnmower.
The math on that is what's really striking. I mean, if Iran sends a wave of 50 cheap drones and the U.S. perfectly intersects all of them, the U.S. military just spent $200 million.
$200 million and depleted, irreplaceable stockpiles.
Just to destroy $1 million worth of easily replaceable fiberglass.
This is the concept of escalation dominance, working against the superior conventional force.
Escalation dominance. Explain that.
Iran's grand strategy doesn't require them to defeat the United States military in a head-to-head conventional naval or air battle.
Because that would be suicide.
Total suicide. They just need to survive the initial onslaught, hunker down in their mountain bunkers, and then methodically bleed the U.S. logistics chain dry.
Just exhaust them.
Exactly. They're exhausting the incredibly expensive, slow-to-replace Western interceptor shield using massive swarms of cheap, mass-produced munitions.
And the desperation is already visible. The reports show the U.S. is frantically scavenging air defense systems from other critical geopolitical theaters.
Culling from everywhere.
Yeah, they are pulling Patriot batteries and hit-ad systems, which are the massive exo-atmospheric interceptors meant to stop high-altitude ballistic missiles.
Right, the really big ones.
They are pulling those away from Ukraine. They are stripping them from bases in South Korea. They are basically robbing Peter to pay Paul just to keep the skies over the Middle East marginally secure.
What becomes immediately apparent when you look at those logistics movements is that the tactical victories the U.S. and Israel are trumpeting, successfully bombing specific radar sites, intercepting inbound drone swarms, they're actually translating into a catastrophic strategic failure.
Because they're running out of bullets.
Exactly. They're winning individual engagements, but losing the overarching war of attrition.
Which means the air campaign has effectively stalled.
It has.
They can't bomb Iran into submission from the sky without completely emptying their global reserve of defensive munitions. And because the air campaign hasn't forced a surrender, the war planners are being backed into a corner.
A very dangerous corner.
And that leads us directly to the most volatile new development we are tracking. The sudden, intense chatter across military channels about an imminent U.S. ground invasion.
Right, because when air superiority fails to break an adversary's political will to fight, the grim, historical logic of war dictates that you must commit physical ground forces to seize territory.
You have to put boots on the ground.
The intelligence sources are flashing red right now. The U.S. is actively moving up to 10,000 troops, drawing heavily from the Marine Corps and the 82nd Airborne Division into the operational theater.
I want to look closely at the specific targets being openly discussed in these military briefings. We are talking about potential amphibious and airborne assaults on incredibly sensitive locations.
High-value targets.
Right. One primary target mentioned is Karg Island,
Yeah.
which is essentially the beating heart of Iran's oil export economy.
It's crucial for them.
Another target being floated is Abu Musa, a relatively tiny but heavily fortified island sitting right in the throat of the Strait of Hormuz, controlling the shipping lanes.
Right.
Let me play the skeptic here for a second, though. If we are already struggling to supply enough interceptor missiles to defend the massive established air bases we currently operate in the region, how does dropping 10,000 American boots onto a hostile, fortified Iranian island solve any of our tactical problems? Aren't we just taking a bad logistical situation and creating a massive stationary target for those thousands of underground Iranian missiles we just talked about?
You are identifying the exact logistical nightmare keeping Pentagon planners awake at night right now.
It seems crazy.
Amphibious assaults against fortified, anti-access, and area denial environments, what the military calls A2AD, they are the most complex, dangerous operations in modern warfare.
And these aren't just empty beaches.
No, these islands are not undefended beaches waiting to be liberated. They are heavily militarized fortresses bristling with anti-ship cruise missiles, naval mines, and pre-sighted artillery.
So if the U.S. attempts to put Marines on the beaches of Karg Island...
Military analysts are warning it would be a Gallipoli-level disaster.
Wow, Gallipoli.
The casualty rates would be staggering, and supplying those troops on a hostile island while Iranian missiles rain down would be nearly impossible.
And while the U.S. contemplates that nightmare scenario in the Persian Gulf, the theater is simultaneously widening aggressively in the north.
It's expanding everywhere.
Yeah, our sources show Israel has fundamentally expanded its operational goals in Lebanon. Before this 30-day mark, the stated goal was simply degrading Hezbollah's rocket-launching infrastructure near the border.
This the buffer zone.
But now, the political and military rhetoric coming out of Israel suggests a full-scale attempt to push their ground forces all the way up to the Litani River.
Which is a massive escalation.
Basically attempting to annex southern Lebanon to create a permanent militarized buffer zone.
But the friction they are encountering on the ground in southern Lebanon is severe. Hezbollah is not a ragtag militia.
No, they are highly trained.
They are a highly organized, heavily armed paramilitary force that has spent the last 2 decades preparing the terrain of southern Lebanon for exactly this kind of Israeli incursion.
They have been waiting for this.
They have built extensive tunnel networks and sophisticated ambush kill zones. The sources we are reviewing claim that Hezbollah forces destroyed 21 Israeli Merkava tanks in a single 24-hour period.
We really need to pause and explain the significance of that number. 21 Merkava tanks.
It's an unbelievable number.
The Merkava isn't some outdated Cold War relic. It is widely considered one of the most heavily armored, survivable main battle tanks on the planet.
Absolutely.
It is equipped with the Trophy Active Protection System, which is literally designed to shoot down incoming anti-tank missiles before they hit the armor. How does a militia destroy 21 of them in a day?
Well, it speaks to the adaptation of the adversary. Hezbollah is likely employing swarming tactics, firing multiple advanced tandem charge anti-tank guided missiles simultaneously to overwhelm the trophy system's radar and interceptors.
Tandem charge, meaning what exactly?
The tandem charge means the missile has 2 warheads in sequence. The first warhead triggers the tank's reactive armor, basically blowing a hole in the defense, and the second warhead punches right through the hull.
Oh, wow.
Losing 21 main battle tanks in a single day is a level of severe armor attrition that the Israeli Defense Forces have not experienced in generations.
So that Litani River push.
It indicates that a push to the Litani River will be incredibly bloody and protracted. It's not going to be a quick sweep.
And as if Israel bleeding armor in the north and the U.S. contemplating a disastrous island-hopping campaign in the east wasn't enough, an entirely new, highly capable player has fully entered the conflict in the south.
Houthis?
The Houthis in Yemen. They are no longer just harassing commercial cargo ships with small drones. The reports from the last 48 hours show they are firing advanced hypersonic ballistic missiles directly into Israeli territory.
Hypersonics, yeah.
They are targeting the southern port city of Eilat and have even launched strikes aimed at Ben Gurion International Airport. Furthermore, they are actively hunting U.S. Navy warships operating in the Red Sea.
And the timing of the Houthi escalation is the absolute key to understanding the broader geopolitical chessboard here.
Because they didn't do this on day one.
Right. The Houthis joining the war at this specific moment, with this level of advanced weaponry, is not some random act of solidarity. It is a highly calculated, synchronized move, coordinated by what is known as the axis of resistance.
Led by Iran.
Iran is fully aware, through its own intelligence networks, that the United States is contemplating that ground invasion of Karg Island or Abu Musa.
So this is a warning.
A massive one. By having the Houthis enter the fray now, armed with hypersonic missiles that can evade traditional air defenses, they are threatening the entirety of the Red Sea transit corridor.
And explicitly putting massive Saudi Arabian oil pipelines in their crosshairs.
Yes. They are sending Washington a blindingly clear ultimatum. They are saying if you put a single American boot on sovereign Iranian soil, we will not just fight you on that island.
We will burn everything down.
We will instruct the Houthis to trigger a total uncontrollable meltdown of the entire Middle Eastern energy infrastructure.
Wow. So they're literally holding the global economy hostage as a deterrent against an American ground invasion.
Exactly. The axis of resistance is demonstrating that they have the capability and the will to ignite a regional war that the United States currently does not have the munitions or the political capital to contain.
The moment you mention Saudi oil pipelines, hypersonic missiles in the Red Sea, and an Iranian blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, we are no longer just having a conversation about military tactics and tank battles.
No, we are talking about economics.
We are talking about the complete asphyxiating strangulation of the global economy. If this 30-day war has proven anything, it's that warfare in 2026 is fought just as fiercely over supply chains as it is over airspace.
Because the military stalemate we just detailed has placed an absolute chokehold on the planet's economic lifeblood.
Well, let's look closely at the Strait of Hormuz. Geographically, it is a narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman.
Very narrow.
At its narrowest point, it is only 21 miles wide, but the actual deep water shipping lanes required for massive supertankers are only 2 miles wide in either direction.
It's a needle.
And historically, about 1/3 of all the world's maritime oil exports, roughly 14 million barrels of oil every single day, must pass through that incredibly narrow bottleneck.
And according to our sources, Iran hasn't just mined it or blocked it completely.
Right. They didn't just sink a ship across it.
No, they have done something far more insidious and economically devastating. They have turned the Strait of Hormuz into a strictly regulated Iranian toll road.
A toll road.
They are exerting total sovereign control over exactly which ships get to pass, under what flags, and under what conditions.
Let's look at the mechanics of how you close a strait without physically sinking a ship across it. It all comes down to the maritime insurance syndicates in London, doesn't it?
That is the invisible mechanism of global trade. Shipping companies don't move $100 million tankers carrying $100 billion cargoes of crude oil without comprehensive insurance.
No one would take that risk.
When Iran declares the strait a conflict zone and begins selectively seizing or targeting vessels, the insurance underwriters groups like Lloyd's of London react immediately.
The premiums skyrocket.
The war risk premiums go through the roof. If a standard hull insurance premium jumps from a fraction of a percent to, say, 5% of the ship's total value, the shipping company suddenly has to pay millions of dollars in extra fees just to make a single 7-day voyage into the Gulf.
And those shipping companies aren't going to absorb that loss out of the goodness of their hearts.
Of course not.
They pass that exorbitant insurance cost directly onto the cost of the oil. Which brings us to the terrifying projections coming from financial analysts right now.
The numbers are staggering.
They are forecasting that Brent crude oil, which is the global benchmark, could easily hit $138 a barrel by the end of the week.
And if that threatened U.S. ground invasion actually materializes?
They are warning oil could violently spike to $200 a barrel.
The global contagion resulting from that single geographical choke point is instantaneous. We are not talking about theoretical future casting for the next quarter. We are seeing the real-world impact right now, today.
Yeah, I was looking at the on-the-ground reporting from around the globe, and it is bleak.
Oh.
In Las Vegas, Nevada, gas prices at the pump have spiked 30% in just a few weeks.
Which directly impacts the ability of working-class people to commute.
In Thailand, the government is actively rationing fuel for taxi drivers and public transport.
Wow.
The Philippines has officially declared a national state of emergency due to acute energy shortages, rolling blackouts, and grid failures. India, which imports a massive percentage of its energy, is warning of a critical shortage of basic cooking gas for its citizens.
It's cascading.
And there are credible projections from energy ministries that the European continent could physically run out of strategic fuel reserves in just 2 weeks if the strait remains a toll road.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look closely at China, because their situation presents a fascinating paradox that exposes the deep fragility of the global supply chain.
How so?
In many respects, China is uniquely insulated from the immediate, acute energy shock of a Middle East war. Over the last decade, they have aggressively engineered their grid, building out an astonishing 1.2 terawatts of renewable solar and wind power.
That's a massive amount of green energy.
Furthermore, they have strategically stockpiled roughly 28 billion barrels of domestic oil reserves.
Okay, so if the oil stops flowing through Hormuz, the lights aren't going to suddenly go out in Beijing. They have the domestic energy to keep the lights on and the subways running.
But a modern superpower's economy isn't just about keeping the lights on. China's economy is entirely dependent on manufacturing almost everything the rest of the world buys.
Right, the factory of the world.
And their vast manufacturing sector is currently in a state of full-blown panic.
This is a crucial distinction. We often think of crude oil strictly as fuel, gasoline for cars, jet fuel for planes. But crude oil is refined into various fractions.
The petrochemicals.
Right. The lighter elements, like naphtha, become the foundational feedstock for the entire petrochemical industry. Oil is the raw material used to create plastics, synthetic resins, agricultural fertilizers, textile fibers, and industrial coatings.
The sources highlight a highly alarming case study. A major Chinese paint and coating manufacturer.
It's a paint company.
But this is a company whose specialized products touch countless global supply chains. They provide the coatings for consumer electronics, the anti-corrosion paint for cargo ships, the resins for automotive parts.
It's in everything.
This massive company only has 40 days of petroleum derivatives left in its stockpiles.
40 days.
If they cannot source those specialized petrochemicals because the tankers aren't leaving the Persian Gulf, they stop making paint. If they stop making paint, the electronics factories stop assembling smartphones because they can't finish the chassis.
Wow. So if Chinese manufacturing stalls, it isn't just a Chinese economic problem. The global supply chain doesn't just experience a slowdown, it physically collapses.
It grinds to a halt.
You literally cannot build a modern computer, a medical device, or a car without those petroleum derivatives.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Let's shift our focus to the Arab Gulf states nations, like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
The heart of the region's wealth.
For decades, the grand, unspoken geopolitical bargain in the Middle East was simple. These massive oil-producing monarchies hosted sprawling American military bases, airfields, and naval ports.
In exchange for protection.
Right. In exchange, the United States provided a cast-iron guarantee of physical protection and security. But now, that dynamic has completely inverted.
It's flipped upside down.
Because the U.S. military is actively using those very bases in the UAE and Qatar to launch airstrikes against Iran, Iran is retaliating by firing missiles directly at the Gulf states hosting them.
Let's think about the infrastructure of Saudi Arabia for a moment.
Okay.
Saudi Arabia is a desert nation. 70% of their entire nation's drinking water is produced by massive, highly complex coastal desalination plants.
Right, they pull it from the sea.
These plants take seawater, boil it, capture the steam, and turn it into fresh water. They are massive, delicate industrial facilities sitting right on the coast of the Persian Gulf.
Highly exposed.
If you are the Saudi royal family and you realize that a single barrage of Iranian missiles could vaporize your desalination plants tomorrow, leaving your population without drinking water in a matter of days.
I mean, aren't you looking at the United States and realizing that the American security umbrella has basically become a lightning rod?
Absolutely.
They have to be saying, you aren't protecting us anymore. Your presence here is actually the imminent danger to our survival.
You can guarantee those exact tense conversations are happening behind closed doors in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi right now.
They have to be.
The United States has essentially cornered its own strategic allies, and the global financial markets see this new reality with brutal clarity.
Investors hate risk.
Investors despise unpredictability, and right now the Middle East is a powder keg tied to the global economy. When you combine that profound regional instability with the crushing weight of America's $39 trillion national debt, which is becoming increasingly expensive to service as interest rates fluctuate, we are witnessing massive capital flight.
The money is running for the exits.
Global investors are terrified. They are actively fleeing U.S. financial markets and moving their capital heavily into Asia, viewing markets in Singapore or even China as a relatively safer haven.
Despite the manufacturing risks we just discussed.
Right, because they perceive the Asian markets as being farther removed from the kinetic blast radius of this war. Right now, the ultimate economic leverage does not sit in Washington or Wall Street.
No, it sits firmly in Tehran.
Iran's ability to keep the strait closed gives them outsized power, which is exactly why the Trump administration is so frantically, almost desperately, searching for a diplomatic off-ramp.
Which brings us to the bizarre, almost surreal diplomatic theater currently playing out in Washington.
It is surreal.
With the global economy screaming in pain and the military facing severe logistical deficits, political leaders are scrambling. And the result is a level of diplomatic dissonance that is incredibly hard to wrap your head around.
What we are observing is sheer diplomatic chaos. It's driven by the sudden, uncomfortable realization among Western leaders that the old rules of engagement, the diplomatic levers they have pulled for decades, simply no longer function.
Let's examine the so-called 10-day pause. Just recently, President Trump took to social media to announce a sudden 10-day pause on all U.S. military strikes targeting Iranian energy infrastructure.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah, he projected immense confidence, claiming that indirect back-channel negotiations were going beautifully and that a comprehensive deal was within reach.
But the whiplash was immediate.
Oh, almost instantly. Senior Iranian officials publicly and vehemently denied that any such negotiations were taking place.
They shut it down.
They called the president's announcement a complete fabrication, labeling it an American deception designed purely to buy the Pentagon time to move those 10,000 troops and scavenge more interceptor missiles.
But the narrative surrounding that 10-day pause announcement is even darker.
The market movement.
Our financial sources point out highly suspicious, massive block trades executed on the oil futures market and the S&P 500 just 15 minutes before Trump made that announcement public.
Let's look at how that works. I mean, if you know ahead of time that the U.S. president is going to announce a pause in a major war, you know that the panic premium on oil is going to briefly drop.
Right, the price will tank.
And the broader stock market is going to momentarily rally on the perceived good news.
Someone or some entity with advanced knowledge of that announcement made a staggering amount of money betting on those exact market movements.
It's crazy. This anomaly is sparking intense, credible rumors of high-level corruption and insider trading within the administration's orbit.
Meanwhile, if you look at the actual diplomatic demands reportedly being passed back and forth through neutral intermediaries, countries like Oman and Pakistan, they are completely divorced from the reality on the battlefield.
The U.S. reportedly sent a comprehensive 15-point plan, and the core demands: zero uranium enrichment by Iran, the total dismantling of their ballistic missile program, and essentially the unconditional surrender of all Iranian regional influence.
And on the flip side, Iran's demands are equally uncompromising. They demand an immediate end to all Israeli-targeted assassinations, the total removal of every single U.S. military base from the Persian Gulf region, and the establishment of joint formalized control over the Strait of Hormuz.
So these are not the starting points for a serious negotiation.
No, these are dueling monologues of maximalist demands. Neither side is willing to concede an inch because neither side fundamentally believes they have lost the war yet.
The U.S. thinks its tech will win.
Right, the U.S. believes its technological superiority will eventually win out, and Iran believes its geographic resilience and economic chokehold will outlast American political will.
But what makes this diplomatic stalemate so genuinely terrifying is the total absence of any mediating authority. This war is being prosecuted with absolutely zero regard for international law, the Geneva Conventions, or international governing bodies.
The United Nations is entirely sidelined.
They are a ghost in this conflict.
The UN is currently being compared by historians and geopolitical analysts to the defunct League of Nations in the late 1930s.
Wow.
It has been reduced to a toothless debating society, basically just issuing sternly worded condemnations while watching the world burn.
Because there is no respected referee, we are seeing neutral, verified reports of horrific war crimes committed by multiple actors.
The human cost is awful.
The sources detail instances where the U.S. and Israel reportedly bombed an Iranian school facility, resulting in the deaths of 175 civilians, along with multiple strikes leveling residential infrastructure under the claim that military assets were hidden beneath them.
And conversely, independent observers report Iran is actively utilizing indiscriminate cluster munitions.
Cluster munitions? Remind us what those do.
Cluster munitions scatter hundreds of smaller bomblets over a wide area. many of which failed to detonate initially. This essentially turns residential neighborhoods into minefields.
They're banned, aren't they?
Yes, these weapons are strictly banned under international customary law, yet they are reportedly being used, resulting in severe civilian casualties in the occupied West Bank. The old red lines have been completely erased.
I have to ask a blunt question about the political dissonance we're seeing. If the U.S. president is standing at a podium publicly claiming absolute victory, saying the Iranian military command is decimated and the war is basically over, while simultaneously deploying 10,000 more combat troops, frantically scavenging interceptor missiles from South Korea, and begging for a 10-day pause on energy strikes.
The contradictions are glaring.
Exactly. How does anyone, whether they are a traditional ally in Europe or an adversary in Asia, trust a single word the United States is saying?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what you are identifying is a catastrophic collapse of American credibility on the global stage.
It's gone.
We are witnessing the very violent death throes of the post-World War II international order. For decades, global diplomacy was anchored, at least superficially, in a shared framework of international law and American enforcement.
And that framework is gone.
It's completely gone. Diplomacy right now has reverted to the brutal 19th century calculus of raw, naked power. Who has the missiles and who controls the shipping lanes?
And internally, the United States is fracturing under the stress.
The political divides are deep.
You have prominent political figures like Vice President J.D. Vance reportedly pushing for strategic restraint, openly acknowledging the severe logistical limits of U.S. military power and arguing for a pivot away from the Middle East.
Meanwhile, the Trump faction and hawkish advisors push for a definitive, crushing military victory that the Pentagon's own logistics reports suggest is physically impossible.
This internal dissonance, this total inability to agree on reality, is the classic historical hallmark of a declining empire struggling and failing to maintain its global hegemony.
And if the old rules are truly dead, and the conventional military power that the U.S. has relied on, the massive aircraft carrier strike groups, the stealth bombers, is failing to secure a decisive victory, the conversation inevitably turns to the ultimate, terrifying escalation.
When conventional options dwindle, we enter the nuclear shadow.
As the conventional stalemate hardens and the political desperation of the leadership on all sides grows, the absolute taboo of utilizing nuclear weapons is creeping back right into the center of the geopolitical chessboard.
Let's look objectively at Iran's nuclear calculus. Before this war started 30 days ago, the International Atomic Energy Agency estimated that Iran had accumulated a 400-kilogram stockpile of uranium enriched to 60%.
Which is highly significant.
Let's explain what that means. Natural uranium is mostly U-238. To make a bomb, you need the highly radioactive U-235 isotope, which you separate using massive cascades of high-speed centrifuges. 60% enrichment is a technical hair's breadth away from the 90% needed for weapons-grade material. The breakout time, the time it takes to spin that 60% up to 90%, is a matter of weeks, not years.
It's incredibly fast once you hit 60.
Before the war, Iran maintained a stance of strategic ambiguity. They had the material but claimed they did not want to actually assemble a bomb. Now, the analysts and our sources are arguing that this 30-day war guarantees Iran will build a nuclear weapon.
It's what nuclear strategists call the North Korea lesson, and it is a brutally rational calculation from Tehran's perspective.
How so?
The Iranian leadership looks at the last 20 years of geopolitical history. They see that authoritarian regimes without nuclear weapons, like Saddam Hussein in Iraq or Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, eventually get overthrown and killed by Western military coalitions.
But the ones with nukes?
Regimes that successfully acquire and test nuclear weapons, like North Korea, are treated with immense caution. They are sanctioned, yes, but they are not invaded. Iran has just survived a massive decapitation-style attack by the combined forces of the U.S. and Israel. They will absolutely never allow themselves to be this conventionally vulnerable again.
So the consensus among intelligence analysts is that weaponization is no longer a possibility, it is an inevitability.
The moment Iran conducts an underground nuclear test, it triggers an immediate, terrifying nuclear arms race across the entire Middle East.
Because Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, None of those regional powers will accept living under the shadow of a nuclear-armed Iran without matching that capability.
It's a domino effect.
We could even see the proliferation cascade out of the Middle East, prompting nations like South Korea to reconsider their own non-nuclear status.
But the nuclear risk isn't just about Iran's future capabilities. It's about Israel's current acute desperation.
Yes, the defense shields.
As we discussed earlier, Israeli multi-tiered air defenses systems like the Iron Dome for short-range rockets, David's Sling for medium-range, and the Arrow systems for exo-atmospheric ballistic missiles are being rapidly depleted by the sheer, overwhelming volume of the Iranian drone and missile swarms.
And the most alarming data points show that Iranian ballistic missiles have already successfully bypassed those depleted defenses and landed terrifyingly close to the Dimona nuclear research facility in the Negev desert.
Which is their nuclear core.
If the Israeli leadership feels its conventional defensive shield is completely overwhelmed, if they feel they're facing an existential collapse from 1,000 continuous kinetic cuts, there is a legitimate, whispered fear within the defense community that they might resort to their unacknowledged nuclear arsenal.
A tactical strike.
The fear is they might use a tactical nuclear strike to end the war in a single, devastating stroke.
And while the United States and Israel are entirely bogged down in this apocalyptic scenario in the Middle East, the rest of the world is not standing still.
No, the tectonic plates are moving.
The geopolitical tectonic plates are shifting rapidly. The Russia-China axis is heavily capitalizing on this chaos. Russia is reportedly executing massive, complex trade deals with Tehran right now.
Exchanging technology.
They are sending advanced military fiber optic technology and their own drone expertise to Iran, bolstering that Iranian mosaic defense. Simultaneously, the Russian military is advancing rapidly on the ground in eastern Ukraine.
Because the U.S. is distracted.
Exactly, taking full advantage of the fact that the United States is actively diverting critical weapons, intelligence assets, and FIAD batteries to the Middle East.
And Beijing is just quietly watching the entire American apparatus bleed itself dry.
They are doing far more than just watching. They are actively hosting the New World Order.
Right.
Global leaders from across Europe to the developing nations of the global south are making diplomatic pilgrimages to Beijing.
Pilgrimages, yeah.
They are signing massive long-term trade deals, securing their critical supply chains outside of the U.S. dollar framework, and cementing a truly multipolar world. All while the United States exhausts its military resources and shreds its diplomatic credibility in the sands of the Persian Gulf.
So what does this all mean? If I can try an analogy here to sum up the geopolitical shift.
Go for it.
For the last 30 years, the United States has essentially treated global adversaries like a high-stakes game of whack-a-mole. You hit Iraq in 2003, you hit Libya in 2011, you place crushing sanctions on Venezuela, you attempt to economically contain China, you isolate Russia.
You just keep hitting the moles as they pop up.
But by fighting this massive, uncontainable, unwinnable war in the Middle East, it feels like the U.S. has finally hit the board so hard and with such reckless force that all the moles decide to jump out of their holes, look at each other, and team up.
That is a very apt analogy, and this raises an important question that every geopolitical analyst is grappling with today. What happens to the United States' standing in the world after the dust finally settles on this conflict?
Because there's no going back.
No, the brutal, undeniable truth is this. Even if the U.S. administration were to declare total victory and completely withdraw all military forces from the region tomorrow morning, the structural damage to the global order is permanent.
It's done.
The rest of the world has looked at the last 30 days. They have watched the vulnerability of the military technology, the chaotic diplomatic messaging, and the willingness to risk the global economy.
And they're spooked.
They have collectively decided they must actively de-risk their economies and their national security from the United States. A multipolar world is no longer a theoretical concept debated in political science seminars. It is the concrete new reality.
There is no single, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world anymore.
Instead, we are looking at a future defined by multiple tentpoles of power. The United States, a rising China, an expanding India, a fracturing and anxious Europe, all aggressively competing for resources and influence in a world where the old laws of the post-WWII era simply no longer apply.
We have covered an immense amount of ground in today's deep dive. We started by unpacking the failure of the quick strike air war, dismantling that magical thinking that a few targeted bombs could magically topple a deeply entrenched nation.
Reality check.
We looked closely at the terrifying logistics and the interceptor deficit that is forcing the threat of a massive bloody ground invasion. We examine how that military stalemate is literally strangling the global economy, turning the Strait of Hormuz into a toll road, and threatening the foundational petroleum derivatives that keep Chinese manufacturing and thus global supply chains alive.
The economic ripple effects.
We explored the collapse of international law, the total impotence of the UN, and the very real, very terrifying specter of a nuclear arms race cascading across the Middle East.
And it is absolutely crucial to remember that while we discuss these events in terms of macroeconomics, geopolitical chess, and ballistic missile trajectories, the impact of this fracturing world order is deeply, intensely local.
Exactly. You are going to feel the physical echoes of this 30-day war. Every time you go to the grocery store and see the inflated prices, every time you pay your utility bill, and in the shifting dynamics of global power that will dictate the economy for the next 20 years.
The quick, clinical in-and-out operation was a dangerous illusion.
The fracturing of reality is what we are actually living through today.
The world as we understood it in 2025 is gone.
Yeah.
We are navigating entirely uncharted territory now, and the rules are being written by whoever can survive the longest.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up today. We talked extensively about how the Arab Gulf states are realizing that the American military umbrella can no longer protect their vulnerable desalination plants and oil hubs from Iranian missiles.
Right.
If that is true, if that decades-old protection racket is fundamentally broken, how long until Saudi Arabia and the UAE decide that they no longer need to price and sell their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Because the petrodollar system, the system where global demand for oil creates artificial global demand for the U.S. dollar, which in turn funds America's massive national debt, is the bedrock of Western economic dominance. If the petrodollar falls as a direct result of this lawless war, the economic pain, the inflation, and the gas prices we are seeing right now, that is just the prologue. Think about that the next time you fill up your tank.